All right, so today we are going deep on a book called The Art of Manipulation by R.B. Sparkman.
Okay.
And this one's a little different. It's not your typical self-help book promising, the 5 easy tricks to get whatever you want. It's actually more of a look into real-life manipulation tactics that Sparkman learned from some pretty interesting characters.
Yeah, he actually learned these tactics firsthand. I mean, he even lost money in the process from some of these so-called mentors of his.
That's right. He had a con man roommate named Hardy who actually had, a kind side to him, believe it or not. There was a sharp black salesman who taught him about appearing meek.
Oh, interesting.
And even a woman who showed him the ins and outs of playing hard to get. I mean, talk about learning from the source, right?
Yeah, you really have to wonder, can anyone learn to get what they want just by understanding human nature?
That's the question at the heart of this book, and Sparkman makes a bold claim right off the bat. He says only 5% of people truly master manipulation.
5%? That's a pretty small number.
It is, yeah. So what makes these master manipulators so different?
Well, he gives us a few clues, especially in how he talks about manipulative women.
Okay, so what's he saying about women?
Well, he observed how they manipulate men, often unknowingly, by tapping into their instincts. Things like playing hard to get it works because it triggers that primal response.
Oh, so they're not even necessarily doing it consciously.
Right. It's more like they're instinctively using these tactics to their advantage.
So while most of us are kind of stumbling around on autopilot, these 5% are playing chess, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And to avoid being pawns in their game, he gives us some red flags to watch out for.
Oh, like what?
One of the biggest red flags is what he calls protesting too much.
Oh, I think I know what you mean. It's like when someone goes overboard with reassurances, right? Like they're trying way too hard to convince you they're trustworthy.
Exactly. It's that overemphasis on good intentions that should actually make you suspicious.
And Sparkman learned this the hard way. He describes how some con artists would pile on those reassurances right before cheating him out of money.
Wow. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much manipulation we encounter every day without even realizing it.
That's why understanding these tactics is so important. And one of the most interesting things he talks about is what he calls the pigeon experiment.
Pigeons. Okay, now this, I gotta hear. What were they like running some kind of feathered con game?
Not exactly. But the experiment revealed something powerful about how pigeons and humans react to rewards. They found that pigeons were more motivated to work for food when the rewards were unpredictable.
So like a little uncertainty kept them on their toes.
Exactly. They called this intermittent reinforcement, and humans are wired the same way. We get hooked on that anticipation of a reward that only comes sometimes.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. How does this tie back to manipulation?
Well, manipulators use this to their advantage. Think about someone who gives you attention one moment, then withdraws it the next. You're left craving that positive reinforcement, never knowing when it might come.
Oh, so it's like a psychological slot machine, keeping you coming back for more.
You got it. Sparkman gives this example of a guy named Bill who used this on his girlfriend. He was hot and cold, making her constantly seek his approval.
And she was completely hooked, even though it was clearly an unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah. It really highlights how these seemingly simple psychological principles can be used in such powerful ways.
For sure. So speaking of control, Sparkman dives into another tactic, the I don't need you stance.
Yeah.
So basically you act like you're less invested than the other person.
Right, and this plays into our natural tendency to resist when we feel pressured or needed. Have you ever been more likely to help someone who didn't seem desperate?
Oh, totally. Neediness is a major turnoff for me. I'm way more likely to help someone who seems self-sufficient.
It's like when someone acts like they desperately need something from us, it makes us want to pull away.
Yeah, makes sense. Sparkman tells this story about his con artist roommate Hardy, who used this with women. He would actually prepay for motel rooms before even going out.
Wow, that's confidence.
Right. Talk about assuming the sale. It's like he didn't even entertain the possibility of rejection.
And that confidence probably made him even more attractive.
I bet. But I am curious, could this backfire? Like, is there a point where playing too hard to get just pushes people away?
That's a great question. There's definitely a balance to strike. If you come across as completely uninterested, it might signal that you're not worth the effort. It's about finding that sweet spot between aloofness and genuine interest.
Okay, so let's move on to the next tactic. This one really surprised me. Sparkman suggests that playing dumb can actually be a manipulative tactic.
Ah, yes. The power of meekness. It might seem counterintuitive, but it can be a very clever strategy.
So you're basically lulling them into a false sense of security,
Yeah.
making them feel smarter than you are so they lower their guard.
Precisely, Sparkman learned this from that black salesman we mentioned. He would intentionally appear less intelligent, allowing his customers to feel like they were in control.
Oh, so they'd be more likely to buy from him because they thought they were outsmarting him.
Exactly. It's like that saying, those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. By playing dumb, you're creating a space for them to talk themselves into whatever you want them to believe.
That's pretty sneaky. Okay, now for the grand finale of Sparkman's bag of tricks, the Nog technique, this one's a doozy. A 6-step method for manipulating someone against their will while making them think they actually like it.
It's a pretty intricate process, but very effective when done right.
So break it down for me. What are the steps?
Well, first, you befriend your target. You need to build that foundation of trust before you can even think about manipulating them.
Makes sense. What's next?
Second, you listen to their objections. Really listen. I mean, you need to understand their perspective and figure out what their main concerns are.
So it's not just about hearing them. It's about making them feel heard and understood.
Right. And that's how you get them to let their guard down.
Okay, I'm following you. What's step 3?
This is where it gets interesting. You agree with their feelings, but not necessarily their point of view.
So you're validating their emotions without actually conceding to their logic.
Exactly. It's a brilliant way to disarm resistance. You acknowledge their feelings so they're less likely to put up a fight.
That's pretty clever. What's next?
Step 4 is finding common ground. You start emphasizing shared values and goals, reminding them that you're both on the same team.
So you're shifting the dynamic from competition to collaboration.
You got it. And once you've established that sense of unity, you can start moving them towards your desired outcome.
Which brings us to step 5, right? What's that?
This is where you lay out your case. You present your argument strategically, using all those persuasive techniques we've been talking about, logic, emotion, self-interest, all while reinforcing the idea that you're on their side.
So you've laid the groundwork, built the relationship, and now you're going in for the ask.
Exactly. And because we've already disarmed them and built that sense of trust, they're much more likely to be receptive to your suggestions.
Okay, and what's the final step?
Step 6 is all about saving face. You give them a way out that allows them to maintain their dignity, even if they're ultimately doing what you want them to do.
So they feel like they still have control over the situation, even though you've subtly influenced their decision-making.
Precisely. It's about preserving their ego and making them feel good about the outcome.
The Nog technique is quite the intricate dance. It makes you wonder, how effective is it really? And are there any potential pitfalls to using it?
Those are excellent questions, and we'll delve into them further in the next part of our deep dive.
Absolutely.
Abby.
And as we've been discussing, the ethics of using these tactics is something we always need to keep in mind. Just because we understand how to manipulate someone doesn't mean we should.
Exactly. But understanding how these techniques work can help us recognize when they're being used on us, and that's a powerful tool in itself.
Stay tuned, because we're going to unpack even more of Sparkman's insights in the next part of our deep dive into the art of manipulation. We'll explore when it's okay to argue, delve deeper into the Nog technique, and discuss how understanding human nature can help us navigate the world more effectively.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the art of manipulation. You know, last time we were talking about Sparkman's Nog technique, that 6-step process.
Yeah, that one really got me thinking. It's amazing how these seemingly small steps can add up to create such a powerful strategy. But before we get too deep into the Nog method, there's something else in the book that I wanted to bring up. Sparkman has this interesting take on picking your battles.
Oh, yeah, that's so important. He says we often waste energy on disagreements that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. He actually has 2 main rules for when to argue.
Okay, lay it on me.
All right, rule number 1, only argue with someone if you actually like them.
Wait, so if someone rubs me the wrong way, I should just avoid arguing with them altogether, even if I think they're wrong.
That's his advice. Think about it. Have you ever actually changed the mind of someone you really disliked?
Probably not. And I guess if I already have a negative opinion of someone, I'm probably not going to be very open to their arguments either.
Exactly. But if you have a good relationship with someone, you're much more likely to listen to what they have to say, even if you don't agree at first.
That makes a lot of sense. So rule number 1 is about choosing your battles based on your relationship with the person. What's the second rule?
Rule number 2, only argue if you have a realistic chance of winning.
Okay, that one seems a little more straightforward. I guess why waste time on a losing battle, right?
Right. But sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment and forget about strategy. Sparkman reminds us to take a step back and really assess the situation.
So before I launch into an argument, I should ask myself two questions. Do I like this person? And do I have a chance of actually winning this argument? And if the answer to either one is no, I should probably just walk away.
Exactly. It's all about being strategic with your energy and choosing your battles wisely.
I like it. Okay, so back to the unnog technique. Sparkman's 6 steps are basically a roadmap for how to navigate those arguments that you do decide are worth having.
Right. So we talked about the first 3, befriending the target, listening to their objections, and agreeing with their feelings. Now step 4 is all about finding common ground.
Right, so highlighting shared values and goals. It's like reminding the person that you're not enemies, you're working towards a common objective.
Exactly. You're building a sense of unity and cooperation, which makes it harder for them to just reject your idea outright.
And that leads us to step 5. What's that all about?
Step 5 is where you state your case. You lay out your argument using all those persuasive techniques we've talked about. Logic, emotion, appeals to self-interest.
And all while reminding them that you're on their side.
Exactly. You're not just trying to bulldoze them with your argument. You're weaving a narrative that makes them see the value in what you're proposing.
I see. Okay, so what's the final step?
Step 6 is saving face. You give the person a way out that allows them to maintain their dignity, even if they're ultimately doing what you want.
So you make it feel like they still have a choice, even though you've subtly influenced their decision.
Right. It's about preserving their ego and helping them feel good about the outcome.
The unnog technique is really quite clever.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're using their own resistance against them. You're guiding them towards your desired outcome without them ever feeling like they've been forced.
Yeah. It's a delicate dance. And as with all of these tactics, the ethics are something we need to think about carefully.
Absolutely. Just because we know how to do something doesn't mean we should.
Right. It's all about using our knowledge responsibly. And one of the most important things is to be aware of our own motivations. Are we using these techniques to help others or just to get what we want no matter the cost?
That's a great point. Sparkman really emphasizes the practical side of things. He's not interested in abstract theories.
Yep.
He wants to give his readers tools they can actually use in their everyday lives.
He calls it street knowledge because it's based on his own experiences in the real world. He's sharing what he learned from the masters of manipulation.
It's like a crash course in human psychology.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of understanding human nature. Most of us are just running on autopilot.
Yeah, we're following our instincts without really understanding why we do the things we do.
It's like we're all walking around these psychological buttons and manipulators know exactly which ones to push.
That's a great way to put it. And they're really good at appealing to our emotions. Logic and reason don't stand a chance against a well-crafted emotional appeal.
So true. It's like that saying, the heart wants what it wants. And manipulators are masters at exploiting that.
They know how to tap into our fears, our insecurities, our desires. It can be pretty scary when you think about it.
Sparkman also talks about building rapport and trust before you can even think about manipulating someone.
Right. You need to create a connection. Make the person feel comfortable and open to your suggestions.
It's like you're setting the stage for manipulation.
And manipulators are often very good at doing this. Mirroring body language, using the person's name, frequently showering them with compliments.
It's like they're building a custom-designed trap tailored to your specific weaknesses.
And once they've gained your trust, they'll start planting those seeds of doubt and suggestion that will ultimately lead you towards their goal.
It's kind of creepy when you think about it.
It is. But the good news is that we can learn to recognize these tactics. Sparkman talks about paying attention to your gut instincts. If something feels off, it probably is.
Right. Don't ignore those red flags.
And before you agree to anything, ask yourself a few questions. What are their motivations? What are the potential risks and benefits? Do I really want to do this?
It's all about taking back control and making conscious choices.
Exactly. And that's what Sparkman's book is all about, empowering us to be more discerning and self-aware.
It's about understanding the rules of the game so we can play it strategically.
And in a world where manipulation is everywhere, that knowledge is more important than ever.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about The Art of Manipulation by R.B. Sparkman. It's really fascinating how he pulls back the curtain on how people influence each other.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Everything from, those subtle things like playing hard to get to the more systematic approaches like the onog technique.
Right, and we talked about the importance of ethics, using these techniques responsibly. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to touch on one more thing that Sparkman talks about. It's this idea that doing someone a huge favor can actually backfire and create resentment instead of gratitude.
Yeah, it sounds kind of counterintuitive at first, but he explains it in a way that makes a lot of sense. When you do someone a really big favor, it creates a kind of debt. And that debt, instead of making them feel thankful, can actually trigger feelings of guilt or even resentment.
So it's like they feel overwhelmed by that obligation. Instead of feeling grateful, they start to pull away or downplay the favor.
Exactly. He uses the example of a college student whose parents pay for absolutely everything. The student might start to feel entitled and ungrateful instead of appreciating their parents' generosity.
That's interesting. So how do you avoid that? Sparkman suggests using something we talked about earlier, intermittent reinforcement.
Right. Remember how we discussed its power in manipulation? Well, it turns out it can also be used to prevent those negative consequences of, excessive generosity. By occasionally withdrawing favors or support, you actually prevent the other person from taking your help for granted.
So it's like they learn to appreciate it more because it's not always there. It makes me think about those friends who are always doing favors for everyone. If they suddenly stopped, I bet people would be pretty upset.
Absolutely. But if you throw in a no every now and then, or maybe ask for a favor in return, it keeps the relationship balanced.
It's all about being strategic. So Sparkman actually suggests getting repayment for a favor before you even do it. Like if you're helping a friend move, you might suggest they help you with a project in return.
Yeah, that way there's no lingering sense of obligation that could, damage the friendship. It's a pretty interesting approach.
It is. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive into the art of manipulation.
Yeah.
All sorts of techniques from subtle to overt.
And we've talked about how important it is to be aware of these techniques and to use them ethically.
So to our listeners out there, now that you've had a glimpse into the world of manipulation, do you think you can spot it in action in your own life?
And maybe even more importantly, can you recognize those times when you might be using these tactics even unconsciously? It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, this deep dive has really given us a new perspective on how we interact with each other and even ourselves.
It's a good reminder that we all have the power to influence each other, for better or for worse.
And the choices we make, how we choose to use that influence, ultimately shape the relationships we build and the world around us.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with a whole new topic to explore. Till then, stay curious.